My guest today is Greg Hoffman, spent nearly 3 decades at Nike, Chief Marketing Officer, Head of Brand Innovation, and author of Emotion by Design, an excellent book and guide for marketers and creatives and leaders, which we're going to talk about today. Greg, how are you?
John, I'm doing great. Thanks for the invitation today. Looking forward to the conversation. And hopefully all the passionate brand enthusiasts out there will find some insightful tidbits to use in their own kind of line of work. So
I think so. And Greg, I was making this joke when we were off air. You are the first and probably the only podcast guest my 14-year-old son has been pumped about. And I don't know if you can see, he suggested I put these shoes behind my left shoulder.
Yeah.
They are. These are his words. They're the 2001 Black Cement Air Jordan 3s, the first re-release. I'm reading. And you begin your book talking about yourself at around that age and around your youth and strongly identifying with the Nike brand. Why do you think the brand is so important and impactful to young people?
Well, it's interesting parallels, your 14-year-old son and with my 14-year-old self, because that is the first time I really started to understand this powerful emotional connection with the brand called Nike at the time. And I got my first Air Force One sneakers as a 14-year-old high school basketball player. And they weren't just products, right? They were shoes that I felt when I put those on that I could fly. And I was also part of something bigger with this brand that was starting to introduce the type of communication and storytelling to the world that was quite exciting and unique and disruptive at the time. And so at the end of the day, why has Nike been able to inspire different generations and also connect them through slogans like "Just Do It" and a lot of the other creative things they do? And it's that they surround and infuse everything they do as a brand with emotion. And in turn, because of that practice, they stir the emotions within their audiences.
In this podcast, Greg, we explore the paths to leadership, and maybe you could discuss your first trip to Oregon for your internship with Nike. You didn't. I'm going to start again. So, Greg, in this podcast, we explore the paths to leadership, and maybe you could discuss your trip to Oregon for your first internship, your first day at Nike, and you didn't go there straight from business school with a marketing degree, and you didn't fly there from Minneapolis. Maybe you can talk about that story of landing the internship and your actual trip to Oregon.
Sure, yeah, and it was definitely an untraditional path, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. It was my senior year in college in Minneapolis, and I had heard about this internship at Nike. There wasn't a lot of information, but I ended up signing up for it. And one day got that phone call within my college apartment saying that I got it. But really the only information is that I needed to be there on, I believe it was June 5th. Otherwise it would go to someone else. That was basically it. Now, the twist here is that within my college apartment, I had a Michael Jordan poster. It was the iconic Wings poster. And on that poster, this black and white stunning image of Michael Jordan with a quote below it that says, "No bird can soar too high as long as they use their own wings," which is quite inspiring. And so every day I looked at that poster when I came in my apartment, and lo and behold, within that year, I found myself driving my parents' van 27 hours from Minneapolis to Oregon to go and work for the very person that designed that poster as a design intern. And so, yeah, I showed up that day. I had no money, right? So I ended up sleeping in my parents' van for the first 3 nights in the parking lot of Nike.
Wow.
Because I had to wait till the following Monday to meet people to figure out where I was going to live. So that idea of living off the land and being resourceful was something instilled in me growing up, and we didn't have a lot as a family. And so I was more than willing to figure out a way, by all means necessary, to make this internship work. And of course, the rest is history after that.
So that's really cool. You get to work for someone who is the creative director behind a poster. In your book, you talk about this moment where you kind of realize there's more to it than the photo, and it's in your chapter about brand identity. And what did you learn working for? Is his name pronounced Damas?
Yeah, Ron Dumas.
Ron Dumas. Ron Dumas. And maybe
right.
Also a second question is, I know many times in my career I've thought about my brand as my logo, and you make the point, despite Nike having maybe one of the most recognizable logos in the world, it's maybe a much smaller part of the identity than people realize.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll start with that second question, and of course, your logo is your visual signature. I like to say it's the punctuation of any message or any product or service that you're putting out in the world. So it's got to be right. And if you spend the time to create a brand mark in the right ways, it has the opportunity to have broad enough shoulders to carry the weight of your brand's aspirations and, quite frankly, your consumers over a lifetime. So, of course, the swoosh, honestly goes beyond just being a corporate mark. It's a symbol of human potential, right? So it's in some ways transcended its original use, which was to simply brand product. And so, yeah, very, very important there. But of course, that's at the center of your visual identity. But surrounding that is your brand color, your brand typography, the name of your brand. And I refer to this is your picture frame. And the stronger the picture frame, the brighter the picture within it will shine, which of course are your products, your services, and the experiences you put out in the world. So very important. Back to your question about, this shift in my mind. I wasn't necessarily tuned in to this idea of designing for emotion when I arrived at Nike. I was very much into how things looked, into the aesthetics of things, and to show up and see these conversations and be a part of them where people are literally asking, sorry, John, can you hear that?
Yeah, I can hear it fine.
Okay.
I hear the lawnmower, but it's all good.
Okay. So I'll back up like one sentence.
Sure.
So to be a part of these conversations where people are asking questions like, how do I want the audience to feel? Not only about the brand, but how do I want them to feel about themselves and their ability to achieve their goals and aspirations, right? And that's quite powerful. And I think that's what separates average brands, great brands, from average brands, is they go beyond just thinking about the type of impression they want to put into the consumer's mind and really get into conversations about how through the interactions that the consumer has with their products and their identity and their storytelling, how that makes them feel empowered and confident to achieve their potential as a human being. And so once that became a big unlock for me, and that's really what started that transition from design into marketing and really being a hybrid of both.
I love that. And I want to talk about that transition. And in this way, one of the biggest lessons and takeaways for me from reading the book is about harnessing curiosity to drive creativity or expand your tool belt. You give some really cool examples in the sports arena of Kobe Bryant being really passionate about curiosity. You talk about yourself being kind of a fitness freak, if you don't mind me using that term, trying on every gadget like the Whoop strap, which I've got on. But we're all just coming to work every day, and it can be hard to build a creative team. And sometimes curiosity can be kind of a personal endeavor. Sometimes creative people are introverted or quiet. So you, as a creative leader, what are some of your tips to build a team and get the most out of everyone's curiosity as a team to do something together at a company like Nike or some of the companies that you advise?
Yeah, well, this is it's going to sound maybe counterintuitive, but this is where having a strong operational arm to your creative studio or team, whether it's 2 people or 200, is really important. We created a platform to share inspiration, to store the inspiration, and have the ability to draw upon it when someone was working or a team was working on a particular project. So each week we would have a sharing session. And this wasn't a session to share insights about Nike and Nike athletes, etc. This was called outside in, where you're getting outside yourself. You're seeing what's happening in the world of technology, of entertainment, of storytelling, of brand experiences outside of the sector of sports, right? Because I think that's important. And back to this idea of transference, you're bringing that all in. And so, you're right. Creativity, oftentimes the application of it is a solitary endeavor and deeply personal. So I think it's the leader's job to create those team forums where everybody's bringing the outside in and sharing it with one another. And I also think that that's the power of playing in the intersections, where you're taking people's curiosity and perspective and experience and crossing it with others. And in the middle of that intersection, oftentimes lies the richest opportunities and ideas. So for me, it's really making, I would really say it was very important to me when a team member would go on a work trip to ensure that they were making a plan and almost giving themselves homework about, outside of the business at hand, who could they meet, what could they see, what could they do and feel, and report back to the team. Because, as I say, all it takes is one piece of inspiration to hit at the right moment to create the next, multi-million-dollar idea.
Yeah, it's these sparks, and I guess a follow-up question to that is you make the point in the book that diversity and inclusion is important in and of itself, and has this additional multiplier effect of having as many different experiences in the room to give your creativity the most potential. And I want to ask kind of go back to the introverted question, and like, what's the best way to get someone who's introverted or quiet, or maybe doesn't know how to share, getting them really going and involved?
Well, it gets back to the empathetic leadership and realizing you can't use the same techniques across the board in a uniform way. Everybody has a different comfort level in terms of how they feel within a group dynamic, right? And it's up to you as the leader to ensure that you are meeting people where they are and what their comfort level is. And if you're only rewarding the loudest voices in the room, you are going to miss out on some big opportunities. And so for me, it was always realizing that we didn't have to have the answers in real time. Okay. And I made sure that I would, we would complete discussions or team meetings, and I would give opportunities at checkpoints in the future for those that needed the time to distill down what they had heard, sit with it a little bit, and then come back with, in a comfortable way, how they could share their ideas. And so allowing the time and the platform to do that, I think, is really, really important. quite frankly, I think the best coaches in sport are that way, right? Phil Jackson used that idea
Absolutely.
of the magic ratio, right? Which is this idea of how many positives to negatives are you using with certain athletes. And he realized that it was different from athlete to athlete. And I think when you're working in a creative collective, you're going to have a variety of diverse ways in which people are comfortable sharing. And quite frankly, in this hybrid work environment we are, in some ways, the online and virtual arena is somewhat more inclusive because you can use things like chat and a variety of other ways beyond just being the person with all the answers in the moment.
You talk about the creative collective, and I'm interested in your take on dealing with certain scenarios, tough clients, and condensed time constraints. So I'll set it up, and then you can take it from here. So in 2010, LeBron James had a televised show called The Decision. He was a basketball, probably everyone knows this, but a basketball prodigy from Akron, played his career to that point in Cleveland, was a free agent. He revealed on national television he was going to the Miami Heat and received a ton of criticism for how he handled it. Sometime after, he came to Nike with his team to talk about his brand campaign for the year. And maybe, Greg, you can take the story from here and what you learned along the way.
Yeah, no, definitely a big moment, right? And I believe that section is titled "Listen Before You Lead." And oftentimes, a lot of us have a preconceived answer or idea of how we want to solve a problem before we've talked to anybody. And unfortunately, sometimes we become unshakable in our conviction for that initial idea, and we don't have open ears. And as you know, the first part of creative problem solving is that idea of empathy and sitting down with the subject, whether it's an individual. Sorry, John. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on here. I think this is a haunted house or something. So let me pick that back up. And so the first part of the creative problem solving process is to lean into that idea of empathy, to understand your subject in the deepest way possible, to reveal their needs and aspirations, right? That's your first step on the way to creating a solution. And so coming into that meeting with LeBron, we had already decided, or I had already decided, that we were going to bring the conversation back to basketball and really show people why we love LeBron in the first place, because of his unbelievable athleticism and skill and IQ on the court, right? But we hadn't heard him out yet, okay? And that's not a great way to start a conversation, right? And so thankfully, there was some pretty powerful voices in the room that made it clear that actually that isn't the desired direction we were to go. And for me, it was a great learning experience, somewhat new in the job as someone who was overseeing storytelling for the Nike brand globally, to ensure that our first rule, if you will, was to certainly listen to the voice of the athlete and understand their perspective and what it's like to walk in their shoes, in particularly in a moment of, in a very polarizing moment. And ultimately, this led to an iconic campaign called "What Should I Do?" Which listeners can find on YouTube. And ultimately kind of really struck a chord in the media with audiences and fans. And of course, LeBron really got to exercise his voice and his conviction within that in both an inspiring way, but one that didn't back down from the critics. So that's again, listen before you lead, I think, is not just about creating great campaigns and products. It really translates to being a great leader as well, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. And you mentioned searching for something on YouTube. I'm going to make a recommendation too. One of my favorite commercials, not one of my favorite commercial is called, I think, Briscoe High School Football. And it's Nike Gridiron, where professional football players are acting as high school students gearing up for the big game. I don't know if you remember that commercial or not, but it unlocks for me this childlike excitement around competing. And I ask about that in the context of your chapter about being dare to be remembered and your tip about bearing your soul. How do you do that day in and day out? Sort of getting the courage to do that, and then what do you really mean by dare to be remembered?
Well, first and foremost, I believe in this moment in time, it's important for brands to be more human, right? In this age of automation, where a lot of what we're doing is about optimization and creating more efficiencies and using all the richness from the data and analytics that we have at our disposal to serve our audiences better. And there's a lot of great within that. But you can also come across as somewhat unrelatable in that pursuit, or the relationship with your audience might be more transactional, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we should be creating more human connections. And so for me, this idea of revealing your soul as a brand is making sure you're sitting down and really articulating, first and foremost, the traits and characteristics of your brand personality. And then thinking about during the course of a year, how do you want to exercise and express those traits in profound ways at the right moments? And so I think you can be quite intentional, just as we are as human beings. I oftentimes would ask individuals and teams, what are the top 2 or 3 traits they want to be known for or remembered for when they're not in the room? Mm-hmm. When your name goes up on the wall and people are talking about you, you have more control over that than you think. And oftentimes I think employees spend so much time on the brand and the brand characteristics, but they never spend the time on themselves, right? And so it's really important, certainly whether you're a leader of one yourself or a leader of many, that you understand if you want to be known as someone who's innovative or curious or a great collaborator, write that down and then lean into that. Don't leave it to chance, because oftentimes what will happen is you're not going to mirror how you're perceived, certainly on your worst days, by those around you.
That's a great point. So much to unpack there. From I actually want to go into what you were saying before about analytics are important, but can't be the only thing. I'm in B2B marketing, typically not one known for stoking emotion, much more transactional, much more analytics and technology driven, and we're trying to build a culture and brand ethos that we are outstanding to work with. And when you work with us, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to have a great experience. All of that stuff. I guess so we don't all work at a company where brand is central, like Nike. And I know that you provide a lot of advice to startups and large companies. And we've talked about building a team, but maybe you could talk about building a culture for a moment in a company where brand is not something that is being leaned into at the moment. What advice would you give for starting?
Well, I think there's a couple questions that we can all ask ourselves, whether we're in B2B or B2C, whether we're an automobile company or a hardware store or food and beverage, you name it. And a couple questions I constantly ask myself and ask others to ask as well in the process of brand building is beyond your product and the service that you're selling, what are you inviting people to be a part of? What's that higher purpose? What's that bigger pursuit? What's the promise you're making to consumers or to businesses that they're going to be better than they were the day before? And that's that idea of your product is an invitation or a gateway to something bigger, something that we all can collectively be a part of. Of course, for Nike, it was always, the power of sport can change the world, that we're stronger. The unifying power of sport is quite infectious. And this idea of, our invitation over the years was that we're on this journey together, and it's a journey of progression and transformation. And yes, we're selling sneakers and apparel and equipment, but those are tools of empowerment to achieve these higher goals. And so you want your employees to be able to walk through the door and feel a shared belief in that sense of purpose, right? Because I think you're working. I always looked at marketing, in three levels, if you will. You have overground marketing, on the ground marketing, and underground marketing. And right now, there's a lot of focus on the ground marketing, which is your day-to-day, real-time digital marketing offense. It drives your business. But the overground marketing is once or twice a year, you're going to lift the whole brand, regardless of product categories, to say something about the human condition or the world. Okay. And your underground marketing, well, that's really relationship marketing, something machine learning algorithms or AI can't do. It's owning the relationships in the cities with the most influential people in your sector, right? And so it's those three levels of marketing is kind of how I looked at building this culture of shared excellence and purpose. And this is why I believe if you embrace this idea of creating an invitation and on a journey of progression, it can be quite enjoyable and rewarding to work in that fashion. So it always feels like every output from your company is additive and leading to this kind of these bigger moments, if you will, right? And I think that's transferable across all types of businesses, right? Because you are right. Not everyone gets to, sit on the shoulders of the power and inspiration that resides in sport, similar to what resides in music, right? Music moves people. But I believe if you ask some of those questions I talked about, anyone can start to put themselves on the path of creating a brand that transcends just products and items and services.
Well, Greg, thanks so much for being here and talking with me. I have one last question for you. So you retired from Nike and you received a photograph, a present, I guess, upon leaving. Can you talk a little bit about why that was a special gift for you, and maybe how it summarizes and encapsulates what you learned and what you received from Nike?
Yeah, thanks for the question. At my retirement party, which was held at the Sebco building, right? Sebco is an Olympian and just a great leader, human being. And so within this party, I received a massive black and white portrait of Colin Kaepernick. And this portrait was taken by a good friend of mine, the legendary photographer and humanitarian Platon. And it was born out of this conversation I had had with him when I was in his studio in New York, and he had told me that he was donating all of his photography over the years to this African American museum at the Smithsonian of photography of people that had fought in the civil rights movements and for racial equality, and everyone from Obama to Muhammad Ali to Elaine Brown. But I said, you're missing someone. And he's like, who? And I said, well, I think Colin Kaepernick at this time is the most contemporary figure when it comes to fighting for racial justice. And so I put those two together, and it really fits into this idea of being more than a product and understanding that you can use your position and platform as a brand when you've earned the opportunity and the status and influence in culture to use it as a force for good and a force for change. And of course, there's a lot within that photograph, because it was only a year and a half before that I was sitting at a kickoff lunch with Colin Kaepernick right next to him, hearing his point of view on, and he didn't have a team to play for at that time in the summer of 2017. And I was just struck by our similarities in that, we came into the world the same way. We're both biracial. We're half black, half white, but we're also both adopted within our white families in a predominantly white school system. And it's impossible to separate that life narrative from your professional one. So that's the eyes I looked through as CMO during that summer of 2017. And fast forward to that night of retirement and receiving that portrait, it was a quite profound moment for me, and one that had many different layers. But at the end of the day, the big message there is that we're just in a moment in time where you do have an opportunity to drive significant business growth and brand strength, but create a better world at the same time. And I'm just so proud to have worked with a brand that did just that, and now be able to share tools and lessons that will give people, hopefully, some rocket fuel to achieve that.
I love that. Greg, thanks so much for being here. This has been a big thrill for me.
Okay, thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.